Well, welcome everyone. I'm Jason Rainbow, senior staff writer at Space News, and this is a Space News panel on what it means to challenge Starlink, not just commercially, but strategically. With more than 7,000 satellites in orbit and counting, thanks in part to access to SpaceX's immense launch capacity, Starlink has set a new benchmark in speed, scalability, and cost, reshaping expectations for the entire satellite broadband industry. But this front-runner dominance also brings risk, especially as governments around the world reevaluate how much they rely on a single commercial provider for strategic infrastructure. And in an era of geopolitical friction and digital sovereignty, secure alternatives and complementary services that offer trust, resilience, and interoperability are more important than ever. So today we'll hear from three leaders building those alternatives. We have Glenn Katz, Chief Commercial Officer at Telesat, Ian Canning, CEO of Eutelsat America Corp and OneWeb Technologies, and Declan Ganley, Chairman and CEO of Rivada Networks. And if I've got this right, Glenn, you're based in Canada. Ian, you're part of France-based Eutelsat's wholly owned independent US proxy company. And Declan, your space outfit, Rivada Space Networks, is based in Germany, but owned by your US company, Rivada Networks, which focuses on terrestrial connectivity. And it's an important distinction to make given where all geopolitics are at the moment. So we've got about an hour, I think, to dig into this, and we're also going to be opening up to questions from the audience. So if you have any, please submit them via the Q&A box, which is separate from the Zoom chat room here. My colleague Dan will help field those, and we'll try to get to them toward the end of our discussion. So let's dive right in, and let's start with going through each of you to explain what is your company's key differentiator in the LEO broadband market, or will be soon? Is it technology, trust, alignment with governments, or something else? And Glenn, let's start with you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Jason. Um, so first, I always like to say that we're definitely in a LEO orbit. It's a LEO technology, but it has nothing, almost nothing to do with what Starlink is doing, right? I mean, we purposely designed our network to provide services to enterprise, government, maritime aviation customers, not consumer. And that's important in terms of how you develop your technology. And so in terms of differentiation, it's very, very clear. Basically, what we've done is created and are creating a pure extension of a carrier's layer two, a terrestrial carrier's layer two Ethernet network in space. It's as simple as that. And the use cases, therefore, are for companies and that require that type of technology. It's not a best effort internet layer three type of technology. So that's the fundamental clear differentiator. And I think as we go through this, you have a bunch of other questions, and we'll be able to refine that a bit. I just want to give some time to my colleagues here as well, since we have a lot to go through.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Ian, let's go with you.
Yeah, so great introduction, Glenn. Thank you for that. And I think we probably all have some similarities there. But no, multi-orbit is a key component of this as well, and multi-bands, yeah. As Glenn mentioned, you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket, into one capability. I don't think necessarily that any one company has the solution for everybody, and it's how we can actually shape those solutions to actually best fit customer need. As EACOWT, as the proxy company for Eutelsat here in the US, we are actively flying a fleet of over 650 LEO satellites. They're actually in operation today and serving customers. We also have a fleet of over 60 GEO satellites. So how can we actually leverage those two components together to provide some of that resiliency, redundancy, and capability, recognizing that different applications have different needs? Yeah, so not all applications need to take advantage of LEO. Some can still take advantage of GEO. And I think there's a really good mix and match between the two. So Starlink have definitely turned the industry on its head. I think it's great for all of us to look inward and be a bit more innovative and a bit more dynamic in the industry. But we are, yeah, as Glenn said, very much focused on the enterprise complex solutions rather than a consumer internet service.
Thank you. And Declan, what stands you apart from not only Starlink, but the others on this panel?
Well, I mean, first of all, and I think Starlink's great. It's a great consumer broadband service. It also is serving enterprise and government customers. They use it as well. It's more suited to the consumer environment. It does it extremely well. But, as they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And there's a lot of things that customers, including enterprise and government customers, want, and they'd rather take what's on offer from Starlink and others, than what they'd ideally like to have, but haven't got an opportunity to get yet. Rivada's got now over 16 billion in signed MOUs with pricing, with demand projections from those customers. What we are doing that is different is we're building the outer net. The outer net as distinct from the internet. The internet is its own thing, and everybody knows what that is. And the outer net is something very different, insofar as that it does not touch the internet. It does not need the internet. It does not use a ground relay station. It does not use a ground gateway. And what does all of that practically mean? It means that you can guarantee, contractually guarantee, and provide service level agreements for complete data sovereignty, data residency, and data security. Now, there are some advantages with speed, latency, and a tiny cyber attack surface as well, which are all very, very relevant. And the other thing that is driving customers and future customers, I should say, our way, frankly, is what's been going on in terms of the very obvious threat to existing infrastructure, in particular the subsea cables that have been attacked and been cut, where people are looking for alternatives. And then I think, I can't speak for others here, but I think, and common sense tells you that this is the case. If you're a government or you're a large enterprise, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. It's definitely going to be the case where government customers have multiple suppliers. And one of the things that, and this isn't hopium, it's really clear when you now see how enterprises and governments are thinking about using, we'll call it satellite data, a bit more to it than that, but the demand is massive. This is not niche. If you look at how much of global capacity satellite made up, it's tiny. It was absolutely tiny, the share of the market that satellite had. That's changing, and it's going to change very dramatically. We're seeing it change right now in real time, and that change is continuing to grow. And I think that I know, because I can see it in my own demand patterns, there's going to be enough customers and demand there. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. And I think a lot of, at least the projections from, say, 2 years ago are going to end up being confounded. It's really interesting what's happening. There's demand. There are users for this service that were not previous satellite customers who are showing up and saying, we want this. And the reasons they're doing that, there are a multitude of reasons, subsea cable attacks being just one of them.
Mm-hmm. Right, so it doesn't seem much pressure here, or feeling much pressure to follow Starlink's playbook, more deliberately taking a different approach, it sounds like, from each of you here. Okay, so you alluded to this, Declan, but the world is moving through some interesting times. It's certainly a very changeable situation as well, with tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, and export restrictions. And the US is, of course, also reassessing its global security role, which recently helped prompt Europe to put out a plan to spend more than 800 billion euros on European defense capabilities, with space likely to get a good portion of that. So lots of changes to the general order of things in a relatively short span of time. It begs the question, how are geopolitical and regulatory pressures shaping your approach to LEO broadband? And that's for everyone, really. But Declan, do you want to start on that, maybe?
I'm sorry, yeah. So look, I mean, these are interesting times, right? I mean, as an entrepreneur with a business that stretches continents and the one great allied family, if I can put it that way, of Western democracies, I do feel that I have 4 kids and they're all grown up now, but it brings me back to those times when you'd be driving on a family trip and the kids would be fighting in the back and someone's pulling someone's hair and someone's calling someone's a name, and you're having to reach back to try and sort to get them to settle down. And look, these things are temporary. They are of course very dramatic. I think it's very important to take the long view here, especially for people that are in major infrastructure investment businesses. You cannot read too much into the dramatics of I won't call it performance politics, but of politics. These ties run very, very deep between Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. They're bonds of family, history, commerce, investment, etc. This is not all blowing up all of a sudden and going away forever. It's just not going to happen. And politicians come and go. I mean, that's the other reality. Now, that all said, we are in the now, and we have to deal with the now that we're in. And you have to have the skill of Talleyrand and Metternich to be and Franklin to be able to navigate these moments. And I love that. I think it's great. And the customers themselves, especially enterprise customers, are meeting the same challenges. They're having to deal with the same issues. So where you have sovereigns, you need to be able to provide sovereignty, sovereign control, sovereign power. So that sovereign has an auditable data trail and knows that they have unhackable, secure communications that they have complete sovereign control over, whether that sovereign is France, Germany, Poland, Italy, the United States, Australia, whoever it might be, that they have that sovereign control. And that can be done. And there is a way to manage through this. And in fact, this kind of disruption, I love it. I'm an entrepreneur. We like disruptive moments. We like these moments of change. So I find it, frankly, thrilling, exhilarating. I think that it is fantastic that Europe has stepped up and is saying, we're going to pay for our own defense and our own security. We all know, I mean, all of us here are of an age. We all know the history of what's gone on over the last number of decades. And we were, and I'm a European, I'm Irish, I'm a European. We were dragging, we were not paying our share for our own defense. And there's a land war in Europe, and there is a Far Eastern army in combat in Europe right now for the first time since the 13th century. That's the North Korean army, attached to the Russians. So we needed to do this. This moment had to come. It's a moment of reckoning. It's not to sound, it's a moment where we, all of us, can step up and be useful in providing solutions to all of what I'll call the good guys in this equation in a way that gives them the sovereignty, the data residency, and the data security that they need.
Mm-hmm. And Glenn, Lightspeed, I think you're starting your deployment next year in earnest. But you're talking to customers already in advance of that. How has the geopolitical situation maybe influenced those discussions, and has it changed your strategy at all as you plot out?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of align with Declan on this. I mean, what's interesting is the long view is important. I can tell you that way before some of the very troubling geopolitical situations that we're faced, the situations that around the world that we're facing today, we were having discussions with customers. And so sovereignty, Declan mentioned the word sovereignty. That's super important for customers with or without these situations that we're seeing, whether it's in Ukraine or even in the United States in terms of the political turmoil that's going on. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed a little bit, I would say, is there's been an exclamation point. So the geopolitical situations have just sort of become a proof point to these governments that we've been having discussions with, to reinforce, not just to them, but maybe to others within their constituency, because it's not just one person that makes a decision, that, yeah, there's a real need for competition. There's a real need for the ability to create private networks in space, as opposed to utilizing the same type of technology that was underutilized before. I want to make another point that Declan mentioned, which I think is interesting as well. Ian, you probably would agree to this too, is that the size of this market, so you look at it from geopolitics, but you look at it from business. Why are we all doing this thing, right? I mean, the size, Declan mentioned it, the size of the satellite operators market for data services today, at least the last I checked a couple of years ago, was like 18 billion and shrinking. The target addressable market that we're all sitting here trying to address, including Elon Musk with Starlink and Jeff Bezos with Kuiper, and these aren't just my estimates. We've done some bottoms up work, but this is also all of the other institutional consultants. It's around 650 billion or maybe even more. And what's interesting is more than half of that is consumers. So what Starlink is doing and what Kuiper is doing, it's a business decision. It's a great network, as Declan and Ian mentioned. It is being used in the enterprise, but in the end, that's only because they don't have systems like what we're trying to propose. They're not available yet. So once we start getting into production and we actually are filling out our constellation, I predict that the world, as we see it in terms of a competitive situation, will change. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make. I mean, the demand is enormous. Sovereignty is super important. The ability to create private networking over a satellite network, one of our fundamental applications, is clearly a very key differentiator to using someone else's subscriber system just because you don't have anything better right now.
Mm-hmm. Ian, would you agree with that? Because your LEO satellites out there in operation, are you seeing that kind of demand?
We are seeing that type of demand, and I think we've seen it in the terrestrial markets. You give data capability to people, and they will consume it, and they will consume more of it than you can possibly imagine. Yeah, I think the geopolitical question you posed has definitely made people recognize that there's been probably underinvestment and under focus on some of these alternate technologies in the past. And I think we are at that tipping point that sort of says, no, we need to do things more differently. And the industrial base is stepping up. Yeah. Obviously, we talk about sovereignty and key capability as part of, as the group level, being part of the RS² consortium and leading that capability for the European Union is key. But also being able to be able to deliver sovereign capability within the underlying network capabilities that we have even today is key. And we're already serving those markets, and we're already penetrating those. As both Glenn and Declan have said, there is no shortage of demand. It's how do we shape ourselves to take full advantage of it.
How seriously is the US government treating the need for Starlink alternatives, given, of course, that Starlink is homegrown in the
Yeah. So as the proxy company, our primary focus is US DoD. Yeah. And it's been mentioned here a number of times that Starlink, great at what it does. It's great at delivering internet service. Yeah. But if you want to start putting that into harsh environments, if you want to put it into more complex network solutions, it's far more challenging. Yeah. So as an example, we were part of a side-by-side test on the Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, and in a very different environment where you've got jets going across the deck, where you've got very challenged EMI environments from all the radar systems and other systems that are on board a ship like that. Our network and our terminals were actually able to hold up far better and be more consistent and reliable in providing service in those scenarios. So, for welfare opportunities and for welfare options, Starlink is great, for providing internet services. for more mission critical capability, yeah, they're looking for something different, and they are looking for something that's shaped, that's managed, yeah, that can provide that sovereignty and that protection of capability end to end. And they don't want that sort of randomness of, yeah, I'll pop you into the internet and best efforts from there. Good luck.
Right, and there's also the multi-orbit element here to add to this too. You have satellites in GEO as well as LEO.
Yep.
You can draw on, and Telesat, Glenn is looking at something like that too. But Glenn, how did public support from the Canadian government shape the feasibility and potential of Lightspeed? How did that shape your course there?
Well, to be very specific, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for the Canadian government. I mean, funding these large infrastructure types of projects is probably the hardest hurdle to get over. And we put in a couple of billion of our own money that we've saved over the years, but without the Canadian government supporting us in the way they have, not just in terms of the $2 billion that they're loaning us, but also in terms of taking revenue commitments, utilizing us within the rural areas of Canada, and then further to that, and I think this is one of the more important aspects of how the Canadian government is supporting us is, they've got 1,400 trade commissioners around the world, and those trade commissioners know everything about Lightspeed. And those trade commissioners work with my team all over the world to speak with governments, to get meetings with folks. We here at Telesat, given our size, I mean, we are a global company, but we would never have been able to do that and scale as quickly as we could from a sales and business development perspective without the support of the Canadian government. So they've been amazing. They've been fantastic. There's Telesat Lightspeed. They sit on the board. So it's a very, very close relationship with them, and we're very happy for it.
And Declan, your funding plans are still largely under wraps, I gather, but you have previously hinted at receiving sovereign wealth fund support. Can you help us understand what that support looks like and the demand you're seeing from this type of investor to back in networks such as yours and why?
We do have a sovereign wealth fund investor. We have not identified who they are because we have an agreement with them to not identify who they are. But our important government customers know who they are, and they came in they put in a very substantial investment. There are now additional sovereign wealth funds that we are in the process of at various stages of what I'll say of closing out with them. We've got one of the largest investment banks in the world currently running that process for us, and that is in a finalizing stage now. This is previously when we did the raise with that sovereign wealth fund that's already in, we did that ourselves. This is now there's now a process being led by one of the large investment banks that are doing this, and I'm limited in terms of what I can say, but there are the level of interest from what I'll say traditional investors. So you've got your enterprise investors, then of course not plain, but sophisticated financial investors. But sovereigns themselves has spiked. So there has been a sea change where a sovereign wealth fund that was investing, say, a year and a half ago, was investing, they have their own reasons, but purely as a financial play, as it were. They're investing to make money, and that's their job. They will have to make money. Now there's a strategic element to sovereign investment that's clearly a very key driver to these investments. So and I've probably already said too much, and I don't want to get in trouble with my bankers, but the sovereign engagement has rocketed up, and the mix that you are going to see I predict in Rivada in the not too distant future will be a mixture of both the kind of traditional private capital that we've already been bringing in, but you're going to see sovereign capital as well. And it's interesting because if you take the Canadian example of how important they've ended up being in that case, that was Canada. I think they made a smart. For Canada they made a good. It was a good move, and I even think that the previous British government and then subsequent government investments into like OneWeb, I don't think that was money wasted. I think these were good investments. And strategically, we all have to make money. We have to make money for our shareholders. We have to make money for our investors. I think, but I can say in Rivada's case, we're absolutely going to do that. And I think this general space is a fantastic space to be in. But the sovereign, the catalysts that are now driving sovereign investors are new, very different, and very compelling, and we're seeing that at our end of that deal.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, interesting. So, Ian, there is a recent report from Quilty Analytics, which observed that if just 1% of Europe's 800 billion euro defense spending plan were allocated to a constellation like OneWeb, it would match the investment levels seen in Starlink or even Amazon's Project Kuiper, for that matter. Well, it's way too early to say how that money would be distributed. What could meaningful support from Europe actually look like, and how would that translate to your side of things? Is that something to watch out for?
Most definitely, and Iris Squared is really the prime example of that, where the European Union have committed substantial funding over a multi-year program, in the $7 billion range, to bring together capability that has both commercial and dedicated, sovereign capability on it. The interesting is as well is making sure that you've got the industrial base to be able to support it. So that investment is going to flow into organizations such as Airbus and Thales and others. Actually at the network layer, we're partnered with SES, with them doing the Ka band element and us taking responsible for the Ku element. So it's really bringing the European community and the European interests together. Now that said, and it's wonderful to see that level of investment and this to be taken seriously. But allied nations are key to operations as we go forward. So everything that's being done is being done on a platform that is designed to be able to support not just the European Union, but actually the broader community, such that as we do go shoulder to shoulder and stand up to threats in the world, we are not hampered by sort of stovepipes of capability that are not possible to interoperate. And I think that's really a key thing.
Yeah. Well, talking about the industrial base there, how does a constellation operator compete on price and performance without the kind of vertical integration that SpaceX benefits from? It launches and builds its own satellites and builds its antennas. How do you go about that? What is the advantage of your approach? I don't know, Ian, maybe.
So, Starlink and to a large degree Kuiper are in a rather unique scenario with the level of vertical integration they have. Kuiper, almost has its own industrial base and its own consumer base as part of its network in terms of just Amazon Web Services and the whole Amazon requirement for communications. Starlink slightly different, and Musk has never made it a secret that all that he is doing is helping him achieve his mission to get to Mars. So almost all of this is a precursor to that mission. So does he fall out of love with this in a few years' time when it's got him to a point where that overriding mission is more important than the mission that he's on today? Now, from a network operator perspective, I think there are definitely benefits to vertical integration, but also you get the diversity yeah, and you get optionality of actually being able to bring a broader industrial base to bear on the marketplace. Starlink, it's sort of like, these are the terminals I've got, take them, leave them, completely up to you. We actually have a range of different terminals from different manufacturers, and some of those addressing the multi-orbit capability, let's say with Kymeta and others in that space, others being more targeted towards other markets, whether it's sort of the Hughes terminals orientated towards enterprise, or some of the Intellian terminals, they came from a traditional maritime sector, but they're getting into all the other sectors as well. So it brings innovation in its own way. It has some cost to that innovation, but I do think it gives the diversity and choice, and then therefore the adaptability of a solution to a particular need, rather than actually one size fits all and you take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Would anyone consider vertical integration if they had, had the money and everything fell into place? So getting into terminals and satellite manufacturing and that kind of thing?
I'm an entrepreneur, and even in the last 2 years, the amount of innovation that has taken place in the space ecosystem and the communications ecosystem it's stunning. How much stuff is available now that wasn't available 2 years ago. And I'm 56 years old right now, and I've been an entrepreneur since I was 19, and I'm very much an Austrian school Hayek sort of guy in terms of the way I think about economics. And I think you go to where the best is, and the best doesn't stay the best all the time. So you need to be able to pivot, be flexible, to be responsive to your customers' needs, and presenting and saying, take it or leave it, really works well as long as they keep taking it, until one day they say, I don't want that anymore, I want something else. And then that thing that you have, you've hung your hat on and bet the farm on, all of a sudden it becomes a millstone around your neck. And so I think the focus has to be on delivering what your customer needs when they need it, and being the best at meeting that particular element of the customer's needs, and being adaptable and flexible enough to be able to keep changing and adapting as new realities and new challenges present themselves. So right now we have this situation where the threat is, and I'll say it right here because God knows I'm fighting them every day, and it's public. China is a massive threat. They're highly active. I've had more than 150 legal actions against them. You can read about them. They care about us, and as they say, if you're not taking flack, you're not over the target. We're taking a lot of flack from them. America's pivoting to face the China threat together with its allies in the region. Europe is dealing with a different threat, which is the Russian threat, which could become and is slowly becoming a combined China-Russia threat, Dragon Bear, as it's been used. It was somebody labeled it that a few years ago. Is that going to change? Is the new politics and the new diplomacy, is it going to extract? Is there going to be a reverse Kissinger? If you read about that, maybe there will be. I don't know. But Europe is in a really a tight spot here, because Europe's having to step up. It's going to have to fund, and with the greatest of respect. And I know that look, there will be a Eutelsat and a OneWeb with or without Iris Squared. But what we've got to be careful is we've got to look. If Europe wants to look at the United States and say, what is the thing that has made the United States so disruptive and has made Starlink so disruptive? And it's that they didn't keep doing the same thing. I mean, all of us can remember when, everybody, very much including the Americans, were completely reliant on the Russians for launch. And along comes Musk and Bezos, and they shake the thing up. And now there's a whole bunch of blossoming new launch companies that are coming along. and launch all of the, the price has plummeted. Same thing happening elsewhere. That's what's happening. You don't create the kind of innovation that Draghi is looking for in his report to the European Commission, with Mario Draghi's report. That kind of disruption is not done by giant boondoggles in the way that Europe used to do it. And I'm sorry, but that's what Iris 2 is. It is one of those old-fashioned European boondoggles. And the way this stuff gets done is it gets done by people that you might not like to have at your dinner table, who might be disruptive and a bit rude and a bit uncouth, and that you just kind of, they make you a little bit scared that they're not properly brought up or something. But this is the kind of disruption that we need to bring in within Europe, not just in space, right across the board, across industry, to shake innovation, spur on entrepreneurship. We need to create a capital market. And by the way, we talked about financing earlier on. Every bit as important as having launch and all of these things is, if you want innovation in Europe, you have to have a single capital market. That's the differentiation with America. You can go to America and you can raise money like this every day. It's really, really easy to raise money, depending on the price that you're willing to raise it at. It's not as easy to raise money for entrepreneurs in Europe because our capital markets are not set up that way. That has to be fixed too. The good news is, I think people like Christine Lagarde, von der Leyen, the Eurogroup, the finance ministers, they know all of this. And I hope and I think we're going to see some really interesting changes coming now. And there has to be, because there's a war on, there's a real threat to European security, particularly to countries in the middle and to the east of the European Union. And we need to be ready for that, to meet that threat in case it comes.
And Declan, just to answer that a little bit, I don't disagree that Europe generally needs to be more agile and adept at taking opportunity. And I think, though, some of what we've seen over the last couple of years is really driving that review of how we are doing business and how business has been done in the past. And I don't disagree that some of the practices can be a little archaic, but I do think they are changing, and I actually do feel strongly that the RS² program is leading some of those changes, because whilst it's a pretty complex consortia, how they're actually going about doing it is quite different than they've done in the past. Maybe you're seeing something I'm not. What I'm seeing is a complete stitch up. I mean, we looked at RFP documents that came out of that stuff, issuing the day before Christmas Eve at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, this is just bullshit. It is not serious for people that actually want real competition from real disruptors. This is stuff that's written for insiders. They're putting it out and timing it so that only a very, very limited group of respondents can respond. It's a stitch up. And I'm going to call it for what it is, because I am a disruptor, I am an entrepreneur, and I think it's going to have to change. You may be seeing something different. I hope you're right. But if there's going to be a pot and there's going to be a pool, they've got to let disruptors play, because the disruptors are going to end up being the real agents of change, as we saw in the United States. That's my opinion. Maybe right or wrong.
Hey, Jason, can I one comment?
Yeah, I was going to get your perspective across the Atlantic. Yeah,
good. Canadians, we're not considered disruptors in general, right? We're very polite people. Most people accept Canadians all over the place, but we're a disruptor, according to Declan. I mean, we and the Canadian government are disruptors, which I think is great for us in Canada. I mean, we saw this coming. We being Telesat, Canadian government. And we kind of got our act together pretty quick, and we're moving. So we need to move. As an industry, we need to move, all of us. So.
Thank you. No, fascinating, and I hate to jump on the other topics. We have so much to cover, and also I want to open up to questions from the audience, and we're getting a lot in already. Thank you for that. But before we get on to that, so far we've mostly been talking about competing or complementing Starlink as it is now. But of course, one thing SpaceX doesn't do, talk about being an innovator, it doesn't stand still. So how do you stay competitive when SpaceX's massive Starship rocket, for example, promises an order of magnitude drop in launch costs and a rise in constellation deployment capability? How does that change the game? How are you planning to compete with not just Starlink now, but Starlink 10 years from now? Maybe, yeah, Glenn, let's go with you.
Yeah, sure. I'll just first of all, I mean, even Starlink's SpaceX, their business, and as public information, our first set of launches will all be done through SpaceX, and they're a good partner. So, and hopefully there'll be more. Hopefully Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin will come around, and so that takes care of that portion because, as we said, not everybody has the money and the ability to become vertically integrated and build your own spaceships. It's really, really hard. Just how long it's taken for Blue Origin. So we need more of that. But in terms of competing going forward, there's a former mentor of mine that said, sometimes it's better to be born a little bit late. And so Starlink started launching and they're failing quick and continuing to innovate. But we had a delay in our funding, but we were able to find our way. And so now what we're going to launch is the latest in technology for what we're trying to do. And then on top of that, one of our differentiators is our satellites will have an 11-year life in the orbits that they're in, purposely designed for that. However, to stay innovative, you have to control something. You can't just outsource everything, even though we're using that best of breed sort of strategy, but you can't outsource everything. So to stay competitive, to be able to modify and change things over time, we're handling all the software for this massive network. Ground station, onboard processor, user terminals, and then of course all the network management system that's needed in real time to be able to manage our customers and our particular set of requirements that we're matching here, right? So the ability to do that is key because these onboard processors right now are very powerful. We'll continue to modify and adapt as needed by our customers, and then we'll continue to launch. And as we continue to launch, we'll continue to launch next generation set of satellites with higher onboard processors over time as we need to add capacity. So that's the way we look to stay competitive in this world.
And Ian, I know your next generation constellation plans are very closely interlinked with IRIS² and what's happening there. But as you're looking at going beyond and improving capability, how much are you considering something like a Starship, or how is that factoring into your calculation?
Yeah, so I mean, the innovation in launch is phenomenal. Yeah, and actually, what SpaceX are doing is helping all of us because it's driving down cost of launch, which traditionally has been one of those big financial barriers to constellations actually being delivered. But it's not just Bezos and it's not just Musk. You've also got the likes of the 3D printing of space rockets and everything else, and then the centrifugal launch organizations. There's an awful lot of innovation that can be taken advantage of. I think something that Starlink has demonstrated and made us rethink is traditionally operators have delivered constellations as sort of big deliveries of constellations. It's going to be far more dynamic as we go forward, and you're actually going to see sort of a more progressive evolution of capability as you actually go forward. Now, you mentioned that we're IRIS² is most definitely important to us, and that's an enabler for us, but we're not actually beholden to IRIS². Yeah, we have our own filings for our own orbits. Yeah, we actually have a rather unique orbit. We're at the higher end of LEO at 1,200 kilometers. That gives us some broader reach and some broader capability, because I think constellations these days are going to go way beyond communications. Yeah, there are so many other things that you can actually do with constellations today. And so many other demands for getting capability up into space, where communications is a great underpin for that. Yeah, but there are a lot of other payloads that might actually go along with those capabilities and help us, evolve and change, how we actually address the markets and the opportunities that we actually take. Yeah, and whether that's sovereign networks within the network, whether that's particular payloads that belong to different nations, or actually are shared payloads. I think the opportunity is broad and deep. Yeah, and I see that's where we will be taking more advantage, rather than just narrowly focusing on a communications path.
Very good. And Declan, anything to add there? Because by the time your constellation gets up there, Starlink will be a little further ahead than it is now. How do you plan for that? How do you kind of try and stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I think I partially answered that earlier, at least partially answered it. So we're not Starlink. We're different to Starlink. If you want Starlink, you should go there. They're very good. If you want a satellite broadband service for your mum's house, go to Starlink. They're great at that. And I don't want to be the satellite service provider to your mum's house. Now, we're putting up 600 satellites eventually, 300 first, then another 300. We're not going to have thousands and thousands of satellites. Our satellites are at 1,050 kilometers. They're at 89-degree polar inclination. It's an all-polar network. It creates a sphere around the planet, not a donut. And that sphere is laser meshed, doesn't touch a gateway. Suffice to say, it's not that we're differentiated from Starlink. We're not trying to differentiate ourselves from Starlink. We're just a completely different thing. And sophisticated customers understand it. And in terms of the number of customers that Rivada will have, if it's 3,000, 4,000, that'll be a lot. We're not going to have 1 billion customers. It will be, but they're governments and large enterprises, and they know what they want, and they're as they understand use cases that are, and frankly, the subsea cable situation has been a very dramatic limelight that's shone on this. But as they understand the use cases that are presenting themselves for why they need this, they're coming to us. It's a really different dynamic now to where it was even a year and a half ago. It's a very different picture.
Okay, one more before we go to audience questions, if I may. We've talked a lot about Starlink. Obviously, it's the title of this webinar. But are there any other players you see as serious competition or collaborators in the next 5 years? We're expecting the first launch operational satellites for Project Kuiper any day now, for instance. Anyone out there on the horizon, or is it each other? Ian, you're grinning. I'll pick on you.
Kuiper are most definitely going to be pretty formidable. The focus that Amazon brings to customer is going to be interesting to see how they apply that to this marketplace. But again, I think they have a very distinct market sector that they're going after. And to Declan's point, I think we all have differentiation and specific capabilities that we're trying to deliver towards our customer base, and it's just bringing more capability, more diversity, and a broader string of capability to the end. And one of our big focuses right now is actually around orchestration and management of capacity. Whether that's within our own fleet between LEO and GEO, but actually far more importantly, across fleet, across capability, such that you can actually take advantage of all of this new facility as we actually go forward and deliver something that our adversaries really cannot easily target and undermine, because Declan's mentioned it on a couple of times in terms of the undersea cables, but there are so many other elements that we're under threat around, whether that's GPS and sort of toggling of GPS signals, etc., etc. There are the threat vectors that we're dealing with today are vastly different than those that we've dealt with in before, and I think to that end, diversity, redundancy, operations across different orbits and frequencies are absolutely vital. So as you say, the title of this is competition with Starlink. I don't think any of us see Starlink as truly a direct one-to-one competitor, because if you're going to chase that, to be honest, they're better at it for delivering pure internet to your mother's house, as Declan has rightly said.
Very good. All right, thank you for that. Now, if I may bring in my colleague Dan to get to those audience questions. I bet we have a lot of them, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. A whole lot of them, some of which you've already answered. So I appreciate you already asking the questions the audience wanted to know. But we did get a good one a few minutes ago from Cynthia Bauer, who asks, as leaders of private companies, what do you see happening for future government regulations on private industry? And how do you see the legal environment for private space activity developing? None of these specified anyone of you in particular, so I guess anyone and everyone who has an answer.
Sounds like one for Ian.
And certainly when you're providing global services off global networks, respecting the regulatory environment is very, very important. And working within that regulatory environment is key. The US, for foreign entities, have Team Telecom oversight of organizations, which at times is burdensome, but also some of it is just good practice. And that allows us to do things. But as Glenn mentioned earlier, having the support of governments, and we have obviously the British and the French governments helping us navigate that environment is absolutely vital. The ITU plays a very strong role in this space, but I also think that nation states are starting to look more closely at how do they regulate capability, and just be sure that it's not trying to bypass their stated requirements. And I think that's something it's a balancing act as a global network operator, but respecting those regulatory environments is very, very important.
Yeah, I might just add, I mean, that's nothing new for us, and that have been satellite operators forever. I mean, we all have had to get market access and regulatory. Some countries have joined together, European Union, US, Latin America, it's a little bit easier. Other countries have their own unique things. So there's experience out there. What we're finding as we go out to continue to get the landing rights, and then eventually you'll need spectrum rights or service licenses, as they call them in different countries. Some of this recent activity is actually spurring a little bit of motivation to do things a little bit better than maybe that's been done in the past, making it a little bit more competitive. I think most organizations are concerned with interference, but what's interesting, interference between NGSO and GEO. I think what I know and what we've done with some others in coordination agreements with some of the other providers is, shockingly, this type of technology, this low Earth orbit technology, where you have satellites moving and beams moving at different times, actually gives you an easier or a better way, a more efficient way to avoid interference and coordinate accordingly. So I'm pretty optimistic. We have a couple more years to get all of those licensing in place. And we're seeing some more cooperation from governments that we didn't think we would or have seen in the past. I don't know if you see that, Ian, as well, or Declan.
We do, and I think, as you say, we're both with sort of long-standing operators that have worked in this space for quite some time. But that's an area where Starlink have often not paid attention to the environment. They've just rolled in and sort of gone, take it or leave it. And then all of a sudden the customers are left high and dry because they've actually been shut down. And I think our experience in this space helps us deal with those issues in a respectful but progressive way.
Very well said.
Great. Jason, do we have time for another?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. So this is from an anonymous attendee, and you did partially address this already, but reading verbatim, will the entry of Kuiper spark a price war in space-based broadband, and how does that affect business models if so? You've all stressed that you're targeting different models to Starlink, enterprise and government. Um, but what I think is the interesting part of this is, does that mean the consumer market is now impossible to target, given the scale of Starlink and the financial power of Kuiper? You all have different markets, but maybe for the companies that come after you as well.
I just want to step up. Oh, first of all, in answer to the prior question, we've now got 34 market access licenses and a very experienced regulatory team at Rivada, and I agree what my co-panelists have said with regard to the importance of regulatory relationships and making sure that you've got to keep your regulators happy. I mean, it's as simple as that. The in your question with regard to Kuiper or the anonymous person's question with regard to a potential price war, I would think Kuiper don't want a price war, I would think, with Starlink, because I certainly wouldn't want to go into a price war with Starlink for consumer broadband. That said, these things have happened in the past, but I think that as I said very early on in this webinar, where we're looking at the demand and we're talking to customers and we're entering into detailed MOUs with customers, the demand for capacity is massive. So I think I predict that at least the year-old or more predictions about capacity demand are wrong. And I think that you're going to see, as capacity comes available, it's going to get soaked up, because the hunger for data out there, even at all sorts of price points, depending on what level of security and sovereignty comes with it, is massive. There's huge hunger for it, and I think there's space for Kuiper. I think there's space for Starlink. I think there's space for all of us here, and frankly, I think there's space for others. I probably shouldn't say that out too loudly, but there is, because there's a big pipe of demand out there, and it's got to be filled.
And probably time for one or two more questions.
Sure. So there were a lot of related questions in the chat, a lot asking about launch capacity and vertical integration, which you already answered. But another aspect of that, Peter Malcolm, and actually a separate anonymous attendee, asked about the impacts that you see coming from tariffs, geopolitical changes, trade wars on satellite production, deployment, procurements in LEO and GEO. How does that affect timelines?
I think Declan substantially answered this earlier in terms of this is a transitory scenario. It's real. It's here today. Yes. But it will settle. We'll find a path forward. Global governments have a tendency to do this. It's just an element of short-term challenge that we're going to have to work through. Is it going to change the fundamentals? I don't believe so.
I agree, 100%.
I agree too. I mean, look, again, the 24-hour news cycle doesn't help. We've got 24-hour news. They've got to talk about something. Who Trump met with 5 minutes ago, and what the latest tweet from X post from whoever. I mean, look, we're weeks into the new administration in the United States. We don't have to guess about this. The president of the United States is telling us he's negotiating. I actually read his book, The Art of the Deal. I read it, and it's actually all there. He is laying out his stall. He's taking a position, and he's saying, "Come and talk to me." And these are massively important things for all of our economies, for all of our securities in the Pacific, in Europe, and globally, and everything else. Tariffs are not going to end up being a thing that kills any of this, because it's in nobody's interest. It's not in America's interest. It's not in Europe's interest. It's not in anybody's interest. Now, I wouldn't want to be communist China in this environment, because I do believe that they are a target of the tariffs, and I agree with that, as it happens. But in terms of the family of allies, of democracies, I don't think these tariffs are going to have a long-term warping consequence especially in areas that are specific to space, satellite launch, those kind of areas. I don't think so.
Okay, that's a great place to end it because we are out of time. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for wide-ranging and deeply strategic conversation. We've learned a great deal about how the future of satellite broadband will depend on not just performance and price, but on trust, resilience, and a more open multi-operator model. So stay tuned to Space News for more coverage on this evolving market. Thank you.